we should start with figuring out how did we meet in the first place? Because this is a funny story.
This is a very funny story. We met at Juilliard, orientation week, probably day one, maybe day two.
Yeah.
Probably day one, actually.
Probably day one. Well, we met most of the same year people.
Exactly.
Because it was pretty small.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't recall if it was shortly after one of our first lunches or something in that nature. And I remember having had a couple of classes or orientation courses with your current wife, Ambra, who was in the historical performance department.
My current wife.
Your current wife. We should probably scratch all of this. Let's just start all over again. Okay.
Well, keep that in. Keep that in.
Your current wife, you know.
This might not age well.
It's supposed to be your second or third, right?
But you saw her before.
No, let's start this over
Did you
again.
see her before I saw her?
Yeah, because we had, well, actually, I don't know.
You saw
when
her
did you
before.
see her?
So I saw her during an orientation week.
Right.
Okay.
So
I saw her in the cafeteria. I remember sitting right next to her.
Right.
And I remember her being like more disinterested in me than whatever crappy food that we had that day. I mean, it was almost as if I didn't exist when I sat next to her at the cafeteria. And I'm thinking to myself, why does she acknowledged everybody else on the table, but she didn't acknowledge me. So I tapped her on the shoulder. I don't remember what I did. I tried to say hi, what's your name? My name is Saad, this and that. And the first thing out of her mouth is, you're not Saad, you're Joe.
Yes.
I just met you.
That's so fun.
I'm like,
yes.
what?
Yeah, so we must have had a historical performance intro. I remember we actually used one of the dance studios that year. And orientation at Juilliard is a bit of a free-for-all because you have, this descent of masters and undergrad and doctoral students in this one building in the middle of Manhattan. And I think it's a pretty much all hands on deck, use every space that you have to get people on the same page. And the historical performance intro meeting was in one of the dance studios. And you walk into the dance studio and there were about 15 or 16 people just seated and a projection going, talking about the program and what the plans were for that year. But it wasn't really much of a chance to get to know one another. I remember we had the obligatory, name, pronoun, something fun about yourself, introduction.
Right.
And then it was right into business. And so that was probably when I had first met Ambra. And then shortly after that, we broke for lunch and she must have sat
Okay, so I don't know
that
that
was
part.
the preamble to you meeting your wife.
I actually don't know that part of the story. I didn't know she saw you right before lunch.
Yeah.
So she just saw you.
We had a historical performance meeting and she just saw me. Yeah.
And you guys talked.
Well,
did you guys talk at all or was it just like hi and bye?
I don't remember talking very much with anybody. I remember just going around and doing introductions. So I remembered Ambra because of course, hi, I'm Ambra, I'm from Italy, and she played violin. And so she's a pretty memorable person. And that with those three details, okay, that's Ambra, one of 16. I guess I wasn't as memorable for her though. Or we just...
I was sitting next to her, I think in the back of my head, of course, I'm like, it's a cute girl, I should say hi, at the very least, but I didn't think like, I was just really surprised because I think she acknowledged everybody on the table. I don't remember it that well. She remembers it better. But I think she acknowledged everybody on the table except me. And then tells me that she just saw me. So now I think she's a psychopath on top of not caring about me at all.
Maybe you shouldn't tell her that. That won't age well either.
No, but she knows this.
This is such a good story. And of course, shortly afterward, I remember Ambra actually coming to me and thinking, she introduced you. I believe I joined for lunch shortly after, and we all ate together. And so it was proven that you were in fact Saad and I was in fact Joe. Yeah. We were two different people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. That was a great little.
Yeah, but then I didn't start really seeing her at all. I don't think I think maybe I ran into the hall a couple of times that first semester, but there was nothing going on that first semester until the next semester, at least with me and her.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess that it took me a while to to get over that first impression.
It was quite a first impression. I remember though, it was very memorable for me because meeting you're half Lebanese, half Jordanian.
Right.
This is interesting to me because also there's a shared background, but you are much more in touch with your Lebanese roots as child of first generation American, or first you are a first-generation American born of immigrant parents. But that was kind of something that immediately I was like, wow, let's talk about this. I want to get to know more about you, how that affects your music, and impacts what you do. And that was very memorable for me. And then shortly afterwards, maybe it was that one semester kind of introduction where everything in Juilliard is a flurry anyway. But I remember we were pretty good friends after that, hanging out, going out, talking about music and everything. And
Yeah. No,
So,
definitely. Yeah, because it's not every day you see someone, especially Lebanese, even a quarter, like you're like a quarter a Lebanese. Yeah, it's very rare to see anyone. Like when I was at USC doing my undergrad, I mean, there were some Armenian people, but it's not really the same as someone from a Lebanese culture. I mean, all the different cultures in the Middle East are so different. Armenians have their own culture. Of course, there's the Armenians from Lebanon, but they also have kind of their own subculture, etc. So to meet someone that had some knowledge of the Lebanese culture, I mean, I just had Sammy, my friend Sammy, the composer. He's full 100% Lebanese, so he actually we were drinking arak down here.
I'm sorry to have fallen short here.
Oh, that's good. This is his drink of choice, coffee. So that's what we're doing. We're drinking the drink of choice of each guest. But yeah, I mean, it's always a treat. And I'm meeting more Lebanese people too. I met a Lebanese composer from overseas in Lebanon online. He was great, and slowly I'm trying to figure out more of what's going on because it's important. Because at least for me growing up, I haven't been. That's probably one of the big weaknesses, I guess, for me is like I don't communicate as much as I should with the Arab community. And I think it's time that I be a part of that in some way. But you also feel, I mean, you're in touch. You're always sending me links of Middle Eastern music and things like that. And I mean, you know the music, just as well or even better.
No, I don't think I know it better. Certainly not as intimately as you do. But I've always loved, I guess, what we would call, at least in the Western world music. Something that was once called ethnic music and things of this nature. What's always left an impact on me is that no matter where you are in the world, people have always found a means of communication through music. And what somewhat saddens me nowadays is that the younger people are ingesting more and more Western influence. I mean, we see this also with reggaeton, the expansion of reggaeton outside of the Caribbean into Latin America, Central South America, also into Europe. I mean, I was in a Neapolitan pizzeria yesterday in Miami Beach, and some of the Neapolitan rap that they were playing had the reggaeton beat to it. And I thought, okay, that is wild, because here's a subculture of a subculture reaching out and totally expanding beyond its reach, and is taking on a place in the global scale musically. But what I've always loved doing is going to a specific culture or a country and immediately researching their quote-unquote oldies. What were our grandparents' generation listening to?
Right.
What were people listening to before World War II and the change in Europe and, of course, in the Western world? And then looking and tracing that back further, as far as we can go, to the early 20th century. And you can really find some incredible music that is unknown. And what I love about that is that element of surprise. And I don't ever take the role of somebody who wants to introduce that to someone from that culture. That's not what I do. But I love sparking off a conversation based on something cool I hear in this piece, or in this 40-minute, musical interlude, or that was caught on a 78 record. Wow, did you hear what they did in that one measure? Like, how cool is that? Yeah. Trying to get a little bit more familiar with the practices.
Well, yeah, because you're a trained Western flute player. I mean, you have at least 2 degrees that I'm aware of, right? From Juilliard, and the degree before that, Oberlin, right? Yeah. So you're like Mr. Classically trained flutist. Everywhere you go,
right.
That's going to be your thing. Yeah. I mean, whether you like it or not, because you got the diplomas from your school.
That's true. Yeah.
But, you have this knowledge of the Arab culture. You also have a big knowledge of the Japanese culture. I know that you're into that, especially, playing on those. I don't know if you've actually played on those flutes, or was it more of the
shinobue, but mainly the shamisen, the 3-string flute. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you not just do the flute, you also do that. Say that instrument again.
The shamisen.
Shamisen. Right. So what about that Japanese connection? Because when you told me about that the first time, I was like, what is he talking about?
It was an interesting thing. When I graduated from Interlaken, Arts Academy High School. And I did 3 years there, from sophomore to senior year. And every year there was an international coffee house. And one of my great friends, still a great friend, Misaki Saito, she's a wonderful pianist, finishing up her DMA at UCLA. She had studied traditional Japanese dance when she was a young child. And during International Coffee House, to show a little bit of Japanese culture to the student body, she would perform for all of us in kimono with this incredible little tape recorder. I remember it was an actual cassette tape recorder. And at that time, it would have been 2008, 2009. These were not
still, that's kind
so
of dated at
common.
that point.
Yeah, it was dated. And that struck me, and she would hook it up to an amp and dance. And what I immediately noticed, kind of still to this day when I listen to music from a different culture, wow, that is so incredibly different from what I'm trained in and what I do. My ear all of a sudden is just totally turned on by this. And it's looking for not only something in common, but something that may have, shown a root, that from which our tradition grew. Because of course, Western music does have its very nascent roots in Middle Eastern and Asian music. I mean, that is the cradle of what we know as musical theory. Arab musical theory goes back, predates Western musical theory.
Before Western theory, yeah.
So I'm always looking to see, is there something there that I can apply or I can learn or I can, be informed by. Make a long story short, when I got my acceptance letter from Oberlin, in that little packet they included something about a winter term project, which is the month of January. Oberlin encourages its students to go out and do something unrelated to their major. A lot of conservatory students actually use this as a chance to learn a new concerto or just spend a month intensive practicing. But I thought, well, here's an opportunity for me to do something surrounding my love of foreign music and get a little bit closer to another tradition.
So is this like is it like an elective, or what is it?
It's an elective month. Okay. It's a self-study month. So you do have to do, I think, at least 3 projects. I did all 4 of them in Japanese traditional music. But that first year I thought, okay, well, here's something I want to do. I want to get a little bit closer with foreign traditional music. I selected the Persian tar, the Japanese shamisen, or the oud.
Okay.
And these were 3 instruments, all, of course, not wind instruments, something different that would challenge me in a different way, to interact with music in a different way, but also all 3 of them unique instruments in their own right, but related, having a core root. I mean, whether you say that the tar predated the shamisen or the oud predated the tar, predated the shamisen, they all have a similar root along the Silk Road.
Right.
And so I thought there was some connectivity there. Ultimately, the Japanese shamisen won because I found a teacher in New Jersey. And that meant for the month of January, I could come home, I could study with her, do an intensive, and go back to Oberlin and present my research.
I mean, was it like an intentional thing to avoid any, because you could have went with any of the woodwind instruments, but you went with the string. Was there an intention behind that, or was it you're trying to get away from you don't want maybe your embouchure to get influenced by playing on those instruments, or was it more like, you needed something vastly different than playing the flute as kind of like this thing that is on the side, because I know this, this is not like a fair comparison, but when you play like a classical trumpet, for example, but then you're playing in the marching band at the same time, I mean, those embouchures are completely different. So oftentimes they tell the classical trumpet players, at least at USC, they told them, don't join the marching band because your embouchure is gonna get affected.
You're gonna blow out your chops, probably.
Yeah, literally blow out your chops. So in the back of my mind, that's what I think you did, but maybe, I don't know.
Interesting. I can't say that was a conscious decision. I think I wanted a challenge, but I also wanted to try and see this process through from a clean slate. I thought if I come in trying to learn the Japanese transverse flute, the shinobue, which I did later, but if I try to come in and I have this preconceived notion of how I'm going to create a sound, how I'm going to immediately interact with the instrument from an organological perspective and from a practical application perspective, I wanted to completely take that out of the equation. And so I knew that doing a string instrument would be another way to interact and to create music. But also I really chose them because I was immediately drawn in by the sound that each instrument created. And The Persian tar is perhaps the outlier between the three because it does have frets, and that does guide you a little bit more. The oud and the shamisen are both fretless instruments, and so you interact with the scale in a very different way. Of course, the shamisen is predominantly built on a pentatonic scale, and we see that in traditional Japanese music. It's mostly, at least for the shamisen application, which is from the 16th century on, it's mostly in a duple meter and a pentatonic scale. So it's, in that sense, to a Western ear, easy to wrap your head around. Whereas if you're dealing with the oud and maqam and you're dealing with Persian traditional music theory, it's very, very intensive, rigorous study kind of work. I didn't really think too much about that, but the sound was the most important thing to me. And then later on I realized that I probably chose the most, the easiest choice between the three in terms of the theory and application.
You stuck around the shamisen after that and kind of dropped the oud and the Persian.
I still do search eBay and Craigslist for the tar and the oud almost every week. It's still on there. I mean, these are still instruments that I would love to tackle at some point.
Yeah.
Even if just to explore a sound world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way with the canoe, and I asked you so many times, oh, where can I get a canoe? But still hasn't happened. One day it will happen. Well, it's like do you want to, you can get a really cheap $100, $200, instrument just like that. But do you really want that? Is that really going to inspire you to play it?
I know.
That's the thing. Otherwise, you have this $200 thing that's that's decoration.
Exactly. You stick it on the wall when you're done with it.
Yeah. You pay a little
so
more.
Sad.
Well, that's what happens. You pay a little bit more. You're going to be thinking to yourself, I paid a lot for that. I should play that thing.
The other thing is that you're interacting with a culture and you're interacting with a craftsman. These instruments are not popular in the world at large. But you can take this as an opportunity to not only engage with the culture intimately, but also engage with a craftsman who's building you something in a tradition, continuing a tradition. Of course, that comes at a premium, but to know that you're in some very small way, even as just an appreciator of an instrument, supporting that and playing a real role in transmitting these skills. I mean, it's not every day you have somebody wake up and say, I want to make ouds for a living, or I want to make qanuns for a living. I mean, it's incredibly taxing work, and it's very expensive to do, and it's a calling. So, of course, a factory-made instrument is a good place to start. It's a budget, it gets you in, it gets the instrument in your hands, that's important. But for me, the other thing was, even if I am not a part of this culture myself, I'm not playing an active role day to day in Japan, I wanted to know that the instruments that I was buying and the accessories I was buying, the things that I was buying, are helping to at least keep that tradition alive in some way.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different than buying a factory-made flute or something, or even there are bigger companies where, I don't know if at the major companies, are all those flutes made by hand, or like what a concert flutist would play in the LA Phil or something?
Oh yeah.
Are those instruments going to be largely handmade, or are they going to be assembled in a more factory setting?
They're made in factories, but they're all handmade instruments. So you're dealing with a lot of machinery, high-tech machinery many times. But often, a professional flute, there are so many hours of hand craftsmanship that have to go into that. Soldering and putting things together, stringing, and you're dealing with all precious metals. So there's a lot of skill and training that has to go in behind someone making those instruments. But you do have the benefit of working with high-tech machinery, because the cost of a professional flute, if you're looking from a silver instrument through to a platinum instrument, can range from $18,000 to $80,000 and up from there. Flutists like our bling. But if you're dealing with something like a handcrafted oud, he might have he or she, the maker, might have a bandsaw and a couple of stencils.
Yeah.
But they're dealing with natural materials, woods and things that many times, it's down to just the hands and time. And, there is a little bit of a difference you feel when you get into the world of machining, high-end machinery, and just somebody sitting in their workshop, just bent over
Yeah. Well, at least with flutes, there is a level of diminishing returns, right? It's not like with a violin, you could buy a violin or a cello for like over $1 million. And there's like some kind of status associated with that. But with the flute, once you get over like 50,000, 60,000, it doesn't really get much better than that, right?
Everybody wants their gold flute, and then you get up to the higher carats. And of course, we play instruments, professional flutists play instruments. Some of them play beautifully on all silver instruments. Some people play instruments that are silver plated in the head joint, or old antique instruments that are silver plated and sound fantastic on them. Other people play 24 karat gold flutes, you know, with engraved keywork.
Yeah.
And when you get into that kind of realm, it is returning in some way to the craftsmanship. How can you make a flute out of 24 karat gold, an incredibly malleable material that is not only going to wear very well and have kind of a resistance to daily use, but also be just as intricate and just as beautiful as you intend it to be as the craftsmen that make the instrument. So the diminishing return is a factor there. And I think that past a certain point, it does become a little bit of vanity. Everybody wants a gold flute. You know, James Galway and Jean-Pierre Rampal, they started the craze for gold flutes. And from that point on, every professional flutist aspired, and every kid dreamt of the day that they could possibly have a gold flute. But once you get there, it really does have to come down, again, to sound. What moves you? What instrument speaks to you the most in that moment? And you are interacting with a craft and craftsmen behind it. Many, many hours of work behind that instrument. One may speak to you more than the other, and hopefully that's the cheaper option. But ultimately, you're not buying an $800,000.
I think Amber said that the same thing. She tried an expensive violin, and she didn't know which one it was, the more expensive one. She liked I mean, they were both still really expensive violins. I mean,
you just say violin, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but she liked the sound of the less expensive violin one, and she went with that.
Yeah.
You know, like what you were saying, it doesn't matter what the cost is, it's what sounds the best, and not just what sounds the best to you, what feels good in your hand.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the one thing as a composer I never really got a chance to like connect with music in that way, which is kind of a strange thing to say as a composer, because I never really got proficient enough at an instrument where I'm like really getting choosy about what instrument am I playing. Like I always played on like this cheap $400 clarinet. I never thought twice about it. You know?
If it works.
I never thought twice. Same with the keyboard, you know.
Right.
Touching a Steinway versus touching a Bosendorfer or touching a Yamaha, it almost didn't make, or even something less than that, it didn't make a difference to me, believe it or not, because I didn't. To me, the sound was always in my head. It always was in my head, and whatever was in front of me. Like right now, I compose on the keyboard, and I hear electronic sound coming out of my little speakers every day, but I know that's not the sound.
Yeah.
So it's like every day is like this for me. That's not the sound.
Do you have ever this kind of dissonance extend into the performance hall from what you heard out of your electronic speakers, and you go and sit in the concert hall and you think, wow, that sounds even better than I thought it would sound.
And it happens all the time, but I never say it out loud.
Wow.
If I say it out loud, it's because, I'm impressed with the performers, but not really about my composition. I'm just impressed how good it sounds when a real person plays it, because even to myself, I'm not thinking about line phrasing the way you guys do. I'm thinking about it more from what are the notes and the pitches on the page, because like you guys start from notes rhythms, things like that, and a tradition, right? Especially playing historical music. But for me, I have to make the tradition in a way. I have to make the notes and the rhythms. Oftentimes I don't even think about things like phrasing. Oftentimes I had players tell me how they phrase things, and I would change the music based off of that. So I've never had that. I'm like really jealous actually of players that have this malleable connection to the music, because that's something. I'm like 30 years old now. I think that ship has sailed in terms of learning an instrument that proficiently as you learn the flute, for example. But that's always going to be something that is there in the back of my mind when I'm writing. And like I'm never going to have that same touch that you or like someone that graduated from Juilliard or whatever would have.
I think that the beautiful thing is that no matter what instrument you play, what school you went to, what quality of instrument you play, the capacity for music and phrasing and I think overall your interpretation comes so much more from the life that you've lived, and also the life that you haven't lived in terms of imaginative and your imagination during performance. You know, schools can guide you to a place where all of a sudden getting that vision out becomes easier. You are all of a sudden trained, and you have the hours under your belt to be able to do something under great duress, pressure and performance and all of that, and still rely on the skill that you've cultivated. But I think a lot of that comes down to the individual. And one of the beautiful things is that you can give me a piece that you've written for solo flute, and then 2 weeks later have another flutist perform that very same work, even in the same hall perhaps, and have two completely different interpretations. Of course, it comes down to accuracy of rhythm, and what you've written is still what you've written. But in terms of that kind of extra offering that an individual can bring that a computer cannot, because the computer's beauty is in its consistency, right? You know exactly what you're getting every time, and it will never change. But I imagine that's probably a lot of fun for you to explore if you're able to work with two different people, maybe even, if not back to back, very shortly in between, and sort of explore these different, I don't want to say differences of opinion, but you know, these options. How does that work for you? I mean, when you are put in that position as a composer, and you get to work with two different artists on perhaps the same piece.
To be honest with you, the first time that a piece is premiered, I always like don't really count it as a performance, because the players are never going to get enough time. Because even if I finish the piece a month beforehand or 2 months beforehand, they really don't know how much time they need to play the piece. And you know, I don't also know exactly what are going to be the difficult things that they're going to play and what are going to be the easy things. Sometimes I write a passage, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so hard for them to play. And then I show up to the first rehearsal and it's like, it's set. And then there were other issues that happened that I had no idea were going to happen. So for the first performance, I'm always like, it's almost like a throwaway performance, which is kind of ironic, because that performance is usually the one that's like the one getting the commission fee for, you know. That's the performers are getting, you know, they're trying to push it out, or we're playing a commissioned piece, you know. For them, it's a big deal to have a world premiere. The audience also there's a little bit of buzz that there's a world premiere, you know. So there is like a lot of hoopla associated with it. But for me, like creatively, that's going to be, you know, that's going to be the worst performance, you know. Even if they do a good job, it's still the second or third performance is just going to be better. Even if it's by the same group. It just always happens that way. I've never had it happen where I was more happy with the first performance than the second or third or fourth or fifth performance. It's never happened. So I always keep that in mind when I'm doing a premiere, because I just want the players to be comfortable. I don't want them to feel like everything needs to be perfect, because I don't even know what perfect means, if there's even such a thing. But after the first performance, I listen to the recording. I'm like very fast in trying to edit things I didn't like, changing notation. I'm always like bothering the performers. Can I see your parts? Can I see what you wrote in there?
Right.
Sometimes they don't want to give it to me. Maybe they wrote some nasty comments. Who knows? But
I hope that's never happened.
So I've had funny comments in there. No, nothing nasty, but I've had a little funny things written in or drawn in. But at the first performance, it's always a throwaway performance. I feel like composers are too. They get really, what's the word? They get too close to the first performance. They get too emotionally involved with the first performance. But I say it's the second, third performance where you should get more emotionally involved, you know. And I think maybe players are like this too. You know, you go on tour with a piece, you know, your first, even if it's a Bach partita or something that's been recorded a billion times, your first show of it is not going to be as good as your second, third, fourth, fifth show.
Right.
And that piece has been played a billion times already before you, right? I mean, so that's kind of the way I feel about that. I mean, I've been writing so much stuff for flute that I'm like flute. I'm like gonna get passed out if I have to write another piece for flute. Not that I have anything against the instrument. I've been writing so much music for flute. And it's a beautiful instrument, but when you write too much for the same instrument as a composer in a row, I can start to feel it that I don't want to keep repeating myself. I need some time to grow, to do other things, and then come back to the instrument. And that's like my next thing. How do I get out of the flute for a little bit and do something else?
Right.
And maybe down the line I get back to writing for the flute. So that's the kind of thing with a composer, like keeping it fresh all the time and not writing the same stuff over it again. And that's part of the reason why I didn't want to play an instrument, because I would have that sound in front of me all day.
Yeah, sure.
So,
do you notice I don't want to say deficiency, but I guess it's the first word that comes to mind, when you are hyper-focused on one particular instrument and you go back and you try to write in what I assume might be even conceived as a different language? I mean, if you move from the flute, say, to, double bass or a cello piece, I mean, do you notice that it takes you a little bit of a while to get back into the swing of living in the tonal world of a cello or the sonic world of a cello as opposed to the tonal and sonic world of a flute?
well, the thing is, when you're going into a new, like double bass is a great example because I haven't written anything for double bass in a solo chamber context. I think it's like that spark because you're excited, like you're genuinely excited when you're dealing with a new instrument or an instrument you haven't dealt with in that way. So for me, yeah, I like the idea that I get to learn something new, But when I'm working on an instrument where I feel like I've read as much as I could about it, listened to as much new music and even old music, then when I'm writing something new for it, I feel like, oh my God, like what do I do now? Because I feel like I already said what I had to say.
Sure.
So if I write a piece for double bass, I feel like almost anything I write is going to be something new, because it's my first impression of what that instrument says to me. Whereas with the flute or like string quartet, for example, I've written a couple of string quartets in the last few years. Like I feel like I've written like 40 plus minutes of string quartet music. I feel like, okay, this version of me knows what a string quartet is to him, right? Same with the flute. That's kind of how I feel. A double bass, for example, I don't know what present version of me of a double bass is. I'm excited to know, but so that's the way I kind of deal with projects if I can. It's like what excites me, especially if it's not a paid project. If it's not a paid project, then
it's a labor of love.
If it's not a paid project, it has to be a situation like that. Like if someone tells me tomorrow, hey, I want you to write a string quartet, but it's not paid, it's going to be difficult because I already wrote 2 in the last few years, and then you ask for another major project that I have to devote 2 to 3, 4 months on, and if it's not a commission, it's very difficult to get going. I mean, it's just not honest as a composer.
That was the next question I was going to ask you, actually, was at what point do you feel that you are at your most compositionally honest? I mean, you said that, when you're writing something for the first time and you don't really have a preconceived notion or an imprint of what you've done in the past, would you say that is your most compositionally honest, or would you say that there's still room for that kind of same freshness and honesty on your 5th solo contrabass piece or double bass piece?
I don't know, because I haven't written that many pieces for different instruments to know. Just string quartet. I mean, only 2. It's not like I don't have 10 string quartets,
Right. Not yet. Not yet. Right.
But orchestra, definitely. I have like 10 orchestra pieces. They're all like 10, 15 minutes long.
But I would imagine that offers you such a broad
Not
palette,
as broad
right?
as you think.
Really?
Because if you're asked to write a 10 to 15 minute orchestra piece that's at the beginning of a show, there is inevitably going to be some sort of mood with that. It's either going to be like this inviting piece that kind of slowly gets into it, or it's going to be this big fanfare type of thing.
Yeah.
That's usually what they expect from you. And if you do something, and there's not really much more time to do anything in 10, 15 minutes besides that. So with orchestra, like if I write a concerto, like I wrote one for clarinet, I just finished one for piano, that was super exciting because now it's like there's this juxtaposition that I'm not used to. Piano and orchestra, like I didn't know what to do with that. I had to come up with my version of that. Right. But orchestra on its own, very difficult because it's more anonymous what it is. you don't know who the players are. You don't know, sometimes you don't even know the conductor. It's just orchestra.
Right, right.
And sometimes you don't even know, which parts of the orchestra are stronger than the others, And it's hard to write a piece that way. But when you write a concerto or something like that, then you know, okay, the clarinet player is so-and-so. And even if I've written 10 pieces for clarinet solo, it's different when you write solo clarinet with orchestra, because you have a different relationship going on there. The drama is about the relationship, not the one person who you might have a relationship with.
Right.
So sometimes the piece is about that.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. But have you had any experience with like new music for the flute? Well, maybe at Oberlin for sure. Oberlin.
At Oberlin, yes, and I remember actually at Interlaken, I was friends with Sam Johnson, a composer, and for some reason one day we were at lunch, and I thought, I'm going to ask him to write me a piece, and I didn't know really the pressure that comes from a friend asking a composer friend to write something for them. Hey, you should write me a piece, and you're like, oh, great. There's 40 hours of my life that I have to devote to this. That's not a paid project, or you might not feel like writing something for flute, in my case. But luckily, Sam agreed to write something. I floated him this idea. I said, I'm really taken by the Annabelle Lee by Edgar Allan Poe, and I thought that the storyline would make a fantastic piece for solo flute. Just the storytelling through the instrument. It's the voice that's very commonly either a bird or a female voice. So the flute lends itself well to a story of a female narrative. And he wrote this incredibly moving piece. And I remember it, I told him one thing, and I said, make it difficult.
So you wanted a virtuosic showstopper.
I wasn't thinking something so much of a showstopper, and now that I realize, the story of Annabelle Lee, it's not exactly something that lends itself to virtuosity, but, I wanted something that I could really, that wasn't just a fluff piece, that wasn't something that was lyrical only and in the more French kind of conservatoire style, because we have so much fantastic lyrical repertoire for the flute, and then we have so much fantastic technical repertoire for the flute, but there's not such a great middle ground there that's been explored. It's usually one or the other, or you have two virtuosic movements and then a really moving second movement. I'm thinking of the Christopher Rouse flute concerto. Hard stuff, but very rarely do you have that kind of ability to blend the two evenly. So that's what I was kind of hoping for, and he delivered it. It was an incredible piece, and I still remember it. I still have the music for it, and I remember the composition teacher told Sam, Sam, nobody's going to be able to play that part there, not here, not at Interlochen, not at the high school level.
Yeah.
And he gave me the music, and I went, oh, crap. Now I have to practice. But I've always enjoyed that idea that, you're able to put yourself in the hands of someone's creativity. And of course, maybe at that point, I was a little heavy-handed in my offering of a suggestion for a motive or a bass line for the piece. But I've always appreciated that when you can work with someone's creativity and work together and not just interpret. I always enjoy interpreting the music of the old French conservatoire teachers and, what you would consider, quote, flash and trash flute repertoire. Right. I've always enjoyed searching in that for the real music. But when you're able to do it with someone who's alive and that you can cultivate a relationship with, even better. Because there has to be some give and take. I don't want to take something that you've written and reinterpret it to the point where you don't recognize it. That could not be.
That little project you gave him, it's not out of the ordinary, I think. Okay. I don't think it's something where a composer goes, how dare you? It's my thing and you should have no say. I don't think it's something that's too much to ask. I think if it starts to get like, it has to be for this anniversary, and it has to be 5 to 7 minutes, and then it has to be paired with so and so piece. It starts getting, and then you don't offer any money or whatever that is. What happened there? Well, something dropped. Well, the set is falling apart.
Scratch it. We've got to start over.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
But I think it's fine when you have somebody, especially if somebody asks you. I think it's fine if they have some sort of little ask, because it's helpful as a composer to have some limitation, not too many limitations. Otherwise, it's like an assignment. You don't want to be assigned. You want to be inspired. So, but then if this composer, for example, wasn't inspired by that, then hopefully that person would say, to be honest with you, I have no connection with this, and then maybe there's some second option you would have liked to have, or maybe so it's like you say, it's a back and forth.
It's a back and forth.
But I haven't had really too much bad experience actually with that when people ask me to write a piece. It's usually pretty amicable, I would say, in terms of what they want. It's usually duration. Duration is usually the thing. I have to fit this piece on a program with these 4 pieces. It can be whatever you want, but it can't really be more than 10 minutes.
Right.
That's fair because they're trying to make a program. Right. You present a half-hour piece, that's nobody wants to be at the show for 3 hours.
Exactly.
So
let's talk about programming a little bit. I've always thought about this, that whether it was Interlochen, Oberlin, or Juilliard. I mean, these are the 3 schools that I have experience with, and now I'm part-time archivist at the New World Symphony, and of course we do a really, I think, good job, if I do say so, of blending new music with traditional programming offerings. But it seems to me that a majority of educational institutions, typically they'll have entire concerts devoted to new music and an entire evening of new music, and there's not really much of an opportunity to blend the worlds, and it kind of creates this divisive situation. I mean, you have students, how many times have we heard friends be like, I don't play new music, or I can't stand the music of insert composer name here. This kind of segregation of new music and quote unquote old music, it seems a bit strange. And then of course you have the offerings of Takemitsu on new music programmings.
It's just hilarious.
It is pretty hilarious. Copeland, Takemitsu, an evening of Gershwin, Copeland, and Takemitsu.
Sometimes Bartok, which is hilarious. It's like that's not new music anymore.
Do you feel that this is something that needs to be considered a little bit better?
I think new music concerts are because when you think, the way I like to think about it also is if you compare it to other art forms like contemporary art, when you go to a contemporary art gallery, you go to MoMA in New York, it's all contemporary art. Sure. So there is like a certain audience member that likes to hear all new music. You don't go to a museum often on the same floor. They have Da Vinci, and then they have some new artist there that nobody knows. It's rare, right? I mean,
wouldn't that be fun though?
It would be fun, but that's from that world. It's not that common. But my only issue really is when someone is commissioned to write a piece that, like for example, an orchestra concert, and they usually already know what's going to be on the show, the Brahms symphony or what have you. They say, can you write a piece that fits with this or is in reverence to these composers? So already you're building this hierarchy that the new piece is not going to be as good as the Brahms or the Beethoven or whatever. Right. And I'm not sure if the administrators realize that's what they're doing, but that's what inevitably happens, is that you're making the piece compare itself to that piece. I mean, there have been composers that did a great job with this, like John Adams did the piece Absolute Jest, which references the Beethoven Symphony. And that piece is great and gets played a lot. But, not everybody is John Adams. Not everybody can do that. Sure. But that's really my little pet peeve when it comes to programming. It's the composers that are living today. We have more resources now than any of those guys had back then. I mean, we have computers. We have players that are way more virtuosic now than they ever were. We have a huge library of music and scores that we can refer back to. What makes this generation of composers living now any lesser than the generations that came before us? We do stand on their shoulders, but why is it not possible that what we're producing now is not at least equal to what they're doing? So I don't think I've heard many people speak from that angle, but I think it's something that at least be considered as a composer.
No, absolutely. I mean, of course, we see the same thing in the instrumental world, where we are just, we are the products of our teachers' generations, who are the products of their teachers' generation, and each generation follows in the footsteps, but also at the same time appreciates the surroundings that they find themselves in, the unique surroundings that they find themselves in culturally and also professionally. I mean, the professional opportunities nowadays, the globalization of Western music and classical music in particular. I mean, I'm able to go around the world and play historical flute. 40 years ago, that would have been available to only very, 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 very small number of people, professional musicians.
Right.
Nowadays, it's very common for European chamber groups to come over and play period music here, American groups to go over to Europe even and perform European music on historical instruments there. It's a changed world. But it doesn't mean that we're necessarily better or lesser than those who came before us, but we are entirely on the shoulders of them and those pioneers.
Right. I mean, I think part of that reverence culture, you don't really see it that much outside of classical music. I think the reverence, that's something I've only been starting to think about recently, like maybe in the last 6 months. This idea of this reverence culture. You don't see it really that much in business. You don't see it that much in other fields.
Do you imagine if we're going around using the business principles from 72 years ago today?
We need to follow all of Carnegie's principles, or any of these. Right. Like, can you imagine? And I think that holds a lot of people back mentally. I think mentally it holds people back because. Especially people that are graduating from these big conservatories, there is always room to grow, and there's always these, there's so much stuff to study, but we should really grasp the moment that we're living in. I think more than the general classical music industry, if you want to call it that, is. Sure. So I don't really know how to do that going forward. I'm doing my little part here with what we're doing, but I think that there has to be a move in some other direction. I just don't know what it is, and that's okay. That's the whole point of living in the present and not living in the past.
This reminds me of an interesting point that Martin Perlman made. He's the music director of Boston Baroque, which was the first Baroque orchestra to be established in America. And it's coming up on its 50th anniversary. And he gave a Zoom talk just the other night where he said, in the early days, the pushback against quote-unquote historical performance or historically informed performance was that, the instruments themselves were kind of scratchy, and the sound that they would create was not really necessarily pleasing, and that instruments had evolved past that point. Why should we go back and quote-unquote rediscover what was once done or what was once the norm? And really, it's a reinterpretation. It's not a rediscovery. But he said, when you're playing Bach on a quote-unquote modern violin that was made 200 years ago, and you're interpreting the music in a style that was popular 125 years ago, who's to say what you're doing is not, in fact, historically informed performance? Mm-hmm. And of course, referencing the romantic interpretation of Bach on, the Heifetz and Oistrakh schools. Kind of blew my mind for a second. I thought, wow, I hadn't really considered that we're still playing so often the music of romantic, classical, and Baroque composers in a firmly romantic style. And I wonder if we're still applying those same principles to what we say is new music, Takemitsu, Bartók, and all these things. I mean, are we also at risk of interpreting these modern composers in a romantic style? And at what point does that become the practice and that become the norm? And we see anything later than that, new music, as threatening to that romanticized norm.
That's a big loaded question. I don't even know how to answer that, especially because I don't perform. Like I said, it's a little bit of tunnel vision too, because I don't go out to concerts as much as I should. But when I do hear things, like I heard, Ligeti String Quartet, the first one being performed with, being alongside Bartók, I mean, to me, that it makes sense. And you can definitely hear the Bartók influence on the Ligeti. but also because Ligeti was influenced by Bartók. So it almost makes sense to me that, okay, that you can play in that way on the Ligeti. So it's not like cut and dry with some of these pieces. But as a composer, it's hard to even think, it's hard to like think outside your own head in those situations because you cannot control that. And these Takemitsu can't control that, you know, it's out of his hands as well. But that's for you guys to figure out. It's not for us to figure out.
I will say that in my interactions with those composers that you just mentioned, I have always found that Takemitsu, Ligeti, and Bartók are much friendlier from a practical standpoint, a technical standpoint, than even Richard Strauss.
Really?
Oh.
Wow.
100%.
Even Ligeti?
Oh, yeah.
That surprises me.
Oh, yeah. I've really always found that. And I think that, you know, which one would I be more averse to actually performing? Which one would give me a little bit more anxiety or agita?
Well, if you play the Ligeti, maybe nobody knows if you played it right or wrong.
No, I mean, Ligeti, of course, the first thing that everybody plays, and if you're a woodwind player, is the six bagatelles.
Right,
the woodwind
quintet, yeah.
Very approachable. I mean, it's fun, it's challenging, but in a fun way. And you understand that he understood the parameters and the boundaries of your instrument and what was possible. And in the same way that some performers may feel freed when something goes out of those boundaries, others can feel constricted by what Ligeti and Bartók did, which was, of course, push the boundaries for their time, for their lived experience. But now, looking back, actually, it's pretty understandable what they're demanding of you, and it's not so far-fetched. It's not out of the box, necessarily.
Yeah, but at that time, a lot of it was out of the box.
Exactly.
And I'm seeing that now, even my work and some of my friends' work, you know, there's a lot of performers complain about certain things that we do in our pieces. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, if I explain this right, and it's something that also is integral to the piece, and it's not something that I'm, like what Ligeti does, he doesn't really take advantage of a certain technique. He uses it, not the virtuosity of the performer, I mean, but he uses it as a central idea in all of his pieces, and I try to do the same thing. That I hope that one day, you know, who knows when that day will be, but those techniques will not be, they will be more commonplace, and performers would, just like that, just like now, you know, these performers that are graduating are so virtuosic, even more than 50 years ago, that, you know, who knows what the next 50 years will entail. So I think the future of music is in good hands. But I think more of it should be focused on the present and not worrying so much about the past or worrying about what would happen in the future. Like what we were talking about before, just being as honest as you could with what you like to do. Because in the end of the day, it's what you like.
Exactly.
You know, if you only like to play historical Baroque pieces, that's totally fine. Right. You know, I only like to write new music. That's it. You know, I don't do film music anymore. You know, I don't do anything commercial in that way, and I like to write the music that I write. So that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So anyway, that's probably a good way to end it.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks Joe for coming over.
Thanks for having me.
And next time we'll do it again.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bye.